Thank you very much for the invitation and the kind words. I immediately start. I can see it here. Though the world does not change with the change of paradigm, the scientist afterwards works in a different world. The world does not change with the paradigm, and that afterwards works in a different world? Doesn't sound consistent, really. Okay. The historian of science may be tempted to exclaim that when paradigms change, the world itself changes with them. The historian of science may be tempted to exclaim. So sober people would say, the historian states, when paradigms change, the world itself changes with them. Okay? That would be normal talk among sober people. No, the historian is tempted. He may be tempted not to state, but to exclaim, emotionally. He's showing his emotions in academia, apparently. So, okay, he may be tempted to explain. And the historian Kuhn apparently falls prey to this temptation. I mean, you don't usually speak in academia about temptations, but he does so, and well, it's very strange, isn't it? Okay, again, you can only shake your head what is happening there. May be tempted to exclaim. Hedging in academic writing, you don't stick your neck out. This is exactly what's happening here. It doesn't say, the historian states this and that. No, the historians may be tempted to exclaim in desperation, probably also. In a sense that I'm unable to explicate further. Oh, wow. The proponents of competing paradigms practice their traits in different worlds. You cannot explicate that further, but you want to speak about it. Oh, yes, you are tempted to exclaim. That is so emotional. All right, so here's the reactions by some sober philosophers, right? People one can talk to. For instance, here, I cannot myself believe that this bleak picture representing an extravagant idealism is true. Israel Scheffler, a sober man, saying, you've got to be joking what you're telling us here. Or another one here, even more sober. Chapter 10 is the worst material in Kuhn's great book. It would have been better if he had left this chapter in a taxi, in one of those famous mistakes that authors are prone to. Peter Godfrey Smith, and the quotes were from chapter 10, so would it be much better because people spend so much time with that shit, with this material. Okay, so, all right. But there were reactions by philosophers who with great effort embedded Kuhn's pronouncement into a neo-Kantian philosophical context in order to make them appear sensible. Clearly, these were reactions of complete despair. How can you make sense of something nonsensical by embedding it into a framework that is itself dead as a doornail? It can't work. It is absolutely impossible, right? And here again, a reaction to this move, again by a sober philosopher, Alexander Bird, and interestingly, also with a metaphor from private transport, right? Like Godfrey Smith. It's interesting, these metaphors play a role here, and this is really the answer in 3 words. Kuhn's wrong turning, period. Right, so, all right. Well, all of this makes obviously very little sense, and I shall try a different approach here. And here's my outline, introduction, why not world, view change, is world change through revolutions really a consequence of a strictly non-presentist historiographic stance, and for conclusion. And I have a question to Hanne. Where is Hanne? Yeah, Hanne, about correctness in science. Is it legitimate to criticize a speaker's outline? Is that legitimate? Yes or no?
Well,
depends.
The board has had changes on slides. So.
Okay, so I tried. I'll tell you something. When I look at that outline, it's a catastrophe. You look immediately, there are 3 short titles, and one title that's so long that you immediately see that the author has completely lost focus. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Probably he's telling you about his infant trauma with his mother or anything. And what is even worse and even more relevant, did you see it was problematic here? Plagiarism. Do you remember his talk, your talk, Juni's talk? You had also 4 conclusions. That was in your talk. And I've seen talks of Hoyningen who had also 1 introduction. So it's self-plagiarism and plagiarism here, right? And that's clear. Plagiarism is not allowed, is it? Okay, so this is problematic. Let's leave this slide. and ask the question, why not world view change? Okay, so look at the title of chapter 10, Revolutions as Changes of Worldview, and then compare it with the first sentence of this chapter. Examining the record of past research from the vantage of contemporary historiography, the historian of science may be tempted to exclaim, here's that passage again, that when paradigm change, the world itself changes with that. Okay, now the title speaks about changes of world view, and the first sentence speaks about world itself changes. That's a difference, isn't it? I give you an example. Compare the change of a picture of Notre Dame de Paris and the change of Notre Dame itself on the 15th to the 16th of April 2019. You know, that's the church that burned down. It is a different whether you burn a photograph of that church or whether you burn down the church. There's really a difference. And Kuhn here, you know, as if it was no difference. This is very, very strange. I remember Sylvan Bromberger, when I visited Boston, I gave a talk somewhere anyway, and then we met Sylvan Bromberger, and I had lunch with Sylvan, and then Sylvan was a colleague of Tom, and they worked together, and then Sylvan at one point said, you know, Tom Kuhn was such a bad philosopher. And, well, if you read something like that, that's a not implausible conclusion. So, let's see. Question 1. Why not just worldview change? Why does Kuhn go into this trouble in speaking about world change? Why doesn't he just stick to worldview change? Question 2, why the implicit, apparently nonsensical identification of worldview change with world change? These are the two questions I want to deal with in this chapter here. At question 1, what are the arguments pro worldview change? Well, they are very obvious. So, example, water as an element in Greek antiquity versus water as a compound from the late 18th century on. So how is that change described? Well, you would say the Greek worldview the world contains the element water. And in the worldview after the chemical revolution, the world contains the compound water. So we speak about worldviews, and that's fine. The worldview changed. We all know that this is changed in the history of science. All right. Therefore, worldview change due to new data, theories, etc. Yes, but the world itself is, of course, not affected at all. The world itself is not affected because water itself does not care about our conceptualizations. It stays the same, whatever we say about it, clearly. And the background is, a very important background, is, of course, a sharp separation of epistemology from metaphysics. Epistemic change is purely subject-sided, and metaphysical change is purely object-sided. It's about objects or knowledge. Objects are there, knowledge is here, in the best case. All right. Now, however, what is Kuhn's objection to describe such revolutionary change as mere change of worldview? Are there any arguments, or can we reconstruct any arguments? Yes. So the first observation is that the ancient Greek scientists, philosophers believed that they knew that water was an element. In the same way as we believe that we know that water is a compound. We don't say we believe it's a compound, we know that it's a compound. More examples to follow. Thus, one may say, with Kuhn, Greek scientists, philosophers worked in a world that contains water as an element. In the same way as we today would, of course, say we work in a world that contains water as a compound. That's an absolutely natural way of talking once you know what water is, right? So they talk that way, we talk this way. And the difference of working in a different world from having a different worldview is this. It's the immediateness of the former. So speaking about a world has some immediateness and the other has some sort of reflective distance. So scientists experimenting with the chemical compound water, they take it for granted that water is a chemical compound. They just know it. They're not qualified, they just know it. It's just water, it's a compound, period. No reflection of the kind, I am experimenting with water, and according to my scientific worldview, water is a chemical compound. And scientists would never say that. They just know it's a compound, period. No further reflection needed. So it's this immediateness that is expressed by knowing and also working with it and being part of my world. The Greek immediateness of water is an element is later replaced by another immediateness, namely by modern scientists, water is a compound. So there is a change of that sort of immediateness of the knowledge. Another interesting observation is that such change of immediate commitments of that kind and of those entities and their nature of revolutions cannot be properly expressed by worldview change. That doesn't capture that specific change of immediateness. Compare statements from today. When we say the dinosaurs went extinct some 65 million years ago, we don't qualify that. We just know it. We teach our children, and no question, according to my worldview or anything. No, they just went extinct. Or the sun is a star similar to many others. I mean, these are just facts. There's nothing to relativize. Also for a philosopher, there's nothing to do there. So no qualification added according to our current worldview. We don't say that because that would open the door to alternative worldviews. There are statements that are meant to be as statements about the world, not about our worldview. I speak about these dinosaurs, not about my worldview when I say that. I speak about the sun, not about my worldview of the sun. So, what's the difference then, the important difference between worldview and world? Well, worldview implies possible alternative worldviews. Once you speak about a worldview, it's always in the back, there could be an alternative. But when you speak about the world, that implies the inexistence of alternatives, thus this immediately and one could say total commitment. And that is something that Kuhn takes very seriously here. And the change of such immediate commitment to entities and their nature in revolutions is thus expressed somehow more adequately, however oddly, by world change. I'm not at the end of my argument here, but by world change. Remember, Kuhn is tempted to explain, because you say, damn it, I cannot express that in the normal way by world view change. I can express it by world change, but that sounds awful, and I don't understand what I'm saying, right? Therefore, the emotions. Kuhn is just desperate. I have to speak that way, and I hate it. I don't know what I'm saying, but I can't avoid it because there is something I want to express that's important. So this is the point here. That's the difference between world change and worldview change. Okay, so we have a motive here why Kuhn then is driven, in a sense, emotionally to speak that way. So this is not the final argument, but I come to the argument later. But first now, question 2, which is even odder, I think. Why the implicit, apparently nonsensical identification of worldview change with world change? I mean, this is such a grave mistake. This is so incredibly stupid, apparently. Well, let's see. Under normal circumstances, there is a clear difference between a thing and an image of that thing. Just if you are in a relationship with someone, I mean, there is a difference of having a photograph of your partner and having him or her in your presence, say 10 centimeters or whatever the distance is. So there is a clear difference between these things. However, in and after scientific revolutions, a kind of blurring of this difference may occur, and that is very important. This is due to the development of a scientific revolution, the ways that a scientific revolution may develop, and the history of a contemporary established theory may be as follows. So it may start with a new idea that is created and is seen by most people as crazy and probably false. So for instance, in the beginning, 1913, of course, atomic model, no one took that seriously, apart from Bohr. No one took it seriously. It took 2 years until the Sommerfeld School then discussed that, and then it was slowly taken seriously. Before, everyone said, this is numerology, right? He's getting the right formula. Fine. If you play around with many parameters, admit inconsistencies, yeah, small wonder that you can get that, but not physically interesting. Okay. Now, such a new and crazy idea may later be developed into a theory that is accepted as probably true, as a probably true description of the world. And then scientists may refer to it as our current worldview, right? They say, yes, it's a good theory. I mean, it's not the last word, but yeah, it's fine. But that may develop. So current worldview leaves open the possibility of alternative worldviews, right? You don't claim this is the final word. This is just, now. But still later, the theory may be accepted as just truly describing the facts, without doubt. And here are the examples. So Ernst Mayr pushed that point, always against the philosophers of science, and he said, you philosophers of science, you do not look at this particular phenomenon, namely, biologists no longer speak of evolution as a theory, but consider it as a fact, as well established a fact that the earth is round and not flat. So he always said, I don't find this sort of commitment that develops in science reflected in philosophy of science. Well, it is, but in a very implicit way. So, evolution in the sense, of course, of descendants, because about the mechanisms, biologists are open, but descendants is just a fact. Or, for instance, to come closer to the present, dark matter. The cosmologist Liza Randall, in a well-received paper in Nature 2018, we know dark matter exists, but we do not yet know what it is at a fundamental level. So we know that it exists. There is no doubt about that. We just don't know what it is, but we know it. It's just out there. Okay. Or, for instance, yes, until roughly 65 million years ago, dinosaurs existed on the surface of the Earth, which would have been 300 years ago, just absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And for us, of course, it's a fact. I mean, it's not a theory. This is a fact, Without blushing, we tell our children who cannot criticize it, right? And we're not saying, in my worldview, dinosaurs existed on Earth. No, we don't say that. This is a fact, period. Okay. So this is the important thing. And Ernst Mayr was absolutely right in saying that this sort of immediate commitment and absolute commitment is not really discussed in philosophy of science. And this is something what is behind that. So, an objection now by scientists would be, before you talk that strange way about worldview and all of that, a scientist might say, for instance, that's correct, that earlier scientists firmly and immediately believed in the existence of entities of which we today know that they don't exist. Yes, we admit that, yeah, no problem. Yeah, we may say that those scientists conceptualized the world in the wrong way, and we conceptualize it much better. So we admit that, and the scientists would say, why then this very strange world change talk? Isn't that completely unnecessary and misleading? Thus, what has changed is the conceptualization of a world, a worldview, but not the world that does not care about our conceptualizations. This is, again, sober people describing that, admitting this, that the total commitments, but you don't have to describe it that way, okay? That's a legitimate objection by a scientist, right? That's a legitimate objection by a scientist. However, it's possibly illegitimate to a historian, and that's now very important. And now I come to the non-presentist historian. Oh, I've got still 90 minutes, right? Yeah. All right. So, So here's the non-presentist historian. And remember, please, the same sentence again. The historian of science may be tempted to exclaim. I mean, you probably didn't take that seriously. He doesn't say anyone could explain, or the physicist, or the philosopher. No, he says the historian of science may be tempted to exclaim. Okay, one of the kind like Kuhn, namely in this new historiography that he helped to establish in the United States. So the historian of science may be tempted. Let's take that seriously, that he really means the historian of science. This sentence is well drafted. Kuhn knew exactly which word to use there in the sentence, as in many other sentences, but one has to read them a little more carefully. Anyway, so the historian referred to here is, of course, the historian who practices the new internal historiography of science. That was introduced there, and I give you a few words. It was institutionalized from the 50s on in the US with Kuhn's active participation. It's one of these things where a development has happened, started and developed 80 years ago in general in the humanities and social sciences, making this historiographical or historicizing term, which is a revolution for the social sciences and humanities that is as deep as the revolution in the natural sciences in the 17th century, but it's completely underappreciated. Anyway, but this happened, and what happened then, that historiography of science, 80 years after that main event, then came, starting in the 30s already with Poiré, because he comes from history of philosophy, where this turn was made. He was aware of it and then turned to history of science, and then he realizes that also the history of science must be done differently. Historiography of science must be done differently. So this is what happened, and from the 50s on, that took up speed, and Kuhn was one of the main protagonists here. And what's the idea there of that sort of historiography? It tries to strictly avoid presentism or Whig history, Whiggism. namely that elements from the present that the historical actors could not know, they have no place in a historical narrative. It's exclusively the actor's perspective that has to be taken by the historian. No exceptions allowed, apart from one or two. Anyway, I'm not going into that. Right, so this is the main thing. So avoiding presentism. This is what the historian of science must do. So remember Kuhn on the aim of structure. I was about to cite that today in the discussion. This essay aims to delineate a new image of science by making explicit some of the new historiography's implications. So it's quite clear what that book is about. It's at least not at first sight theoretical history or anything. No, it is something that talks about the concept of science or image of science by taking seriously some of the historiography's results. So it's consequences from historiography for a philosophical purpose. Yes, that's what he said at other places. So what are the consequences of this commitment regarding the descriptions of scientific revolutions, if you really take that seriously? And Kuhn took that seriously. He's a very stringent thinker, even if it doesn't look it all the time. So I give you the example again of dark matter with a fictitious extrapolation to 2042, right? Such that your emotions are not involved and you don't have to exclaim them and stuff like that, just very soberly and cool analyze that. All right. So there is nearly complete consensus in today's cosmology about dark matter. This is a fact. You can show it's a sociological fact, of course. And the statement 2022 would be: we live in a universe that contains the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, our galaxy, many other galaxies, and dark matter. That is something that almost every cosmologist today would sign and say, that's exactly right. This is the authoritative statement about the state of the art in cosmology. All right, let's keep that at that. Now, I said there is a nearly complete consensus. It's not 100%. There are some strange outsiders. There are some dissenting voices. For instance, there is the noted astrophysicist Pavel Krupa, who does not believe that dark matter exists. Very strange, right? He does not believe it. What does he say? It's even worse. The standard dark matter-based cosmological model is the most falsified model which the very vast majority of scientists have ever believed in. 21, it was a year ago, right? He said that, and he means that. This is not a joke. He says this is really deeply wrong, and it's a catastrophe that all these people believe in dark matter. And there are very interesting arguments. It's a heated discussion. There are many arguments pro and con and so on, but the majority of astrophysicists, they really say dark matter is there, and it will remain there. Okay. What's the background? Pavel Krupa is a defender of the so-called Mond theory. Mond is modified Newtonian dynamics that changes for very, 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 very weak gravitational fields, changes the equation that governs, that tells you what the force is. And Mond theory that claims that it's able to explain the relevant phenomena without dark matter. So there are a number of phenomena for which dark matter is very useful, and one is rotation curves of galaxies. I don't have to go into details, and other stuff, and gravitational lensing and whatnot. And there is an alternative gravitational theory. This standard theory is based on general relativity. And the Mond theory just changes gravitation in such a way that it can take care of at least some of these phenomena that give rise to dark matter in general relativity. So this is, by the way, a normal thing in the sciences, in physics especially. When you have a problem, you have two possibilities. Either you change the fundamental equations, which is damn costly, or you change the boundary conditions, right? And you put everything that you dislike, you put in the boundary conditions, and then the effect is wonderful, and you're not falsified, right? So these are the two things. This is exactly what happened. So the galaxies didn't do how they should do. Oh, I invent dark matter, boom, 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 and then they rotate wonderfully. Yeah, the distribution of the dark matter, where does it come from? Oh, a little tricky, we find something. Right, and the other way is, okay, leave the matter as it is, but change the basic equation, and then let's change it in such a way that we get the new phenomenon by covering law. All right, so here is so there is a competition between these two theories. And now imagine the following, which is just a thought experiment. Imagine that Krupa convinces the cosmology community of the non-existence of dark matter within the next 20 years. I've no idea whether this will happen, but at least Cooper, he's not an idiot, he's not an outsider, he's not a crazy lunatic. He's got good arguments, and also the inventor of, I was at a panel discussion on Zoom where the inventor, I've forgotten what's his name, of Mond, the Israeli physicist, and Cooper was there, and other luminaries, and it was a lively discussion, what is going on and how strong Mond is. And so, well, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that Cooper convinces the cosmology community. All right. The result would be the following, then in 2042, we live in a university that contains the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, our galaxy, many other galaxies, and no dark matter. That would be the consensus then. All right. Now compare the 2020 statement with the 2022 with the 42 authoritative statements. 22, we live in a universe that contains dark matter, and 42, we live in a universe that does not, that contains no dark matter. These are the statements, the relevant statements by the scientists, by no one else, by the scientists. Now, a comment by astrophysicists in 2042 would be, yes, in 2022, we believed that dark matter existed, but we were wrong. Our view of the universe has changed. That would be the astrophysicists say, and that would be absolutely correct and legitimate. But now look, what is the non-presentist historian doing? The non-presentist historian would not be allowed to speak in this way because it involves a reinterpretation of statement 2022 in the light of statement 2042, from knowing to falsely believing, right? And that the historian is not allowed to do because that would induce presentism, right? This is strictly forbidden for the non-presentist historians, similar to, say, for instance, what people suggested when chemists referred to the dephlogistated air in 1785, what they really meant was oxygen. This is strictly forbidden in today's history. This is the result of this revolution we had in the second half of the 19th century and 70 years later in historiography. So this is really, it would be an absolute sin, that sin for the historian to speak that way. Thus, the non-presentist historian, when he or she considers these two statements, we live in a universe that contains dark matter, we live in a universe that contains no dark matter, this historian is forced or seduced to, right, to say, is tempted to exclaim, the universe has changed between 2020 and 2042. What else can she say? This is what the scientists say. And when I say, what has changed? Well, apparently the damn universe has changed. Nothing else has changed, right? And he cannot or she cannot redescribe it the way the astrophysicist is allowed to redescribe it, right? To say, we falsely believe. Yes, but you never said in 2020 we falsely believe. You never said that. No, immediately you said we know it's there, right? And this is here the point that you can understand why the historian may be really tempted. It's really a temptation, and then to exclaim, you say, my God, what sort of bullshit am I saying here, right? I'm not understanding what I'm saying, but I'm forced to speak that way. At least I'm tempted to speak. Now, the phenomenon Kuhn is referring to with this world change talk is undisputed. Namely, scientists sometimes have very strong ontological convictions. They state them as facts, leaving no conceptual space for alternatives. Nevertheless, these convictions are not immune against historical change. This is just what the historians tell us. This is absolutely undisputed. The question is, how do I describe that, right? That this fact here. And the question now is, must the non-presentist historian succumb to the temptation to exclaim world change in this situation? And of course, Kuhn apparently saw no alternative way of expressing that without sinning against his convictions as a non-presentist historian. So this is perfectly understandable, perfectly consistent, although the result is awful. I mean, talking about world change, my God. All right, seducing innocent philosophers to discuss that, stealing their time. I mean, at LSE, one of my students, my grad students, went to LSE, and he did. I asked him to do their work, and he did a class in philosophy of sociology, philosophy of social science, a course there, and some of the professors said that, you know what, he knew that he was coming from me, and he said, you know what Kuhn did? He put philosophy of science back for 10 years, right? And Hoyningen added another 5. So, now look at these alternatives. In 2022, almost all cosmologists took it as fact that dark matter exists, whereas in 2042, almost all cosmologists took it as fact that dark matter does not exist. So this is an alternative formulation that I propose here. Or even closer to Kuhn's phrasing, if you want to assimilate a little more, that was not my fault. What is that? Here we are. Right? In 22, almost all cosmologists behaved as if they lived and worked in a universe that contained dark matter, in parentheses, which is, according to our present 2042 knowledge, not the case. So in that formulation, you are not violating the standards of non-presentist historiography, but you avoid the world change talk, and you just articulate the difference between the worldview change talk, and the world change talk into something explicit, which is the immediateness of that supposed knowledge. So this seems to be entirely legitimate for the non-presentist historian, but avoids unnecessary metaphysical baggage. And that is always a good advice for scientists or historians or whomever. Avoid metaphysical discussions, right, if they are not absolutely necessary. And for you, in order to remember that until the rest of your days, here is H.H. Razor. Disputationes metaphysicae non sunt multiplicanda praeter necessitatem. Okay, you can all Latin, I guess. So that's the Razor, and that Razor just erases the problem here. Okay, here's my conclusion. Kuhn's world change to evolutions talk is motivated by the historical fact that scientific theories that were once accepted as facts are nevertheless later given up. That's an undisputed historical fact. The attempt by non-presentist historians not to influence in any way their historical descriptions by later developments. And therefore, he was tempted to talk that way as it did. However, it is possible for the non-presentist historian to authentically describe the respective revolutions without the metaphysically dubious world change talk, and therefore, world change through evolutions talk can be safely dismissed. Thank you very much.